So, there's this phrase in Telugu that translates to, basically it means no one is completely right.
Which is, a pretty heavy concept to start off with.
It really is. But in 1966, this filmmaker named Gio Pontecorvo took that exact terrifying, kind of ambiguous concept and turned it into a piece of cinema.
Right, a piece of cinema that was so intensely realistic that it actually got banned in France for, I think, 5 years.
Yeah, 5 whole years. And that's what we are diving into today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources to go through today.
We really do. We've got retrospectives from the BFI archive, deep analytical essays from the Criterion Collection, some great pieces from Sight and Sound magazine.
Oh, and that foundational review by the late Roger Ebert.
Exactly. And all of these heavy-hitting sources are circling the exact same focal point, which is Pontecorvo's landmark film, The Battle of Algiers.
Right. And, the overarching thesis running through all of this film criticism is just profound.
It really stuck with me.
Yeah, because the essays argue that in these historical conflicts, the line between right and wrong, well, it doesn't just disappear.
Right. It just becomes incredibly hard to see.
Exactly. It gets completely swallowed up by the mechanics of survival.
But wait, before we go any further, we need to set some ground rules for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because if you are listening to this right now, expecting us to give you a traditional plot summary.
Or like a breakdown of the ending or something.
Right. Yeah, you won't find it here. I mean, the sources we are looking at do not treat this film as just casual entertainment.
No, at all. They treat it like a clinical dissection of human nature, colonial power, and, well, urban resistance.
So we are going to honor that by focusing purely on the ideas the film provokes. No spoilers, just the themes.
Which makes sense because summarizing the narrative beats would honestly undermine the entire purpose of the film anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the BFI archives make a real point of highlighting how Pontecorvo intentionally avoided traditional storytelling. He wasn't interested in giving the audience a classic hero's journey.
Right? He was interested in the anatomy of an insurgency.
Exactly. The raw mechanics of it.
So let's start with those mechanics. Like, how do you actually make someone feel the weight of no one is completely right without just putting a narrator on the screen to lecture them?
Well, that's where the Sight and Sound essays bring up this concept of political realism. I mean, Pontecorvo practically invented a brand new visual language for this.
He really did. He fundamentally altered how the camera interacts with the subject.
Yeah, to get that documentary feel, he just stripped away all the usual artifice of mid-century Hollywood.
Oh, the lighting, the sets, all of it.
Right. He shot on this high contrast, really grainy black and white film stock to make it look just like evening newsreels from the era.
And he used those handheld Airflex cameras, right?
Yeah, exactly. To basically plunge the viewer directly into the middle of these massive, chaotic street protests. But honestly, the most radical choice he made was his casting.
Oh, the casting is wild. He used actual citizens of Algiers.
Almost exclusively. I mean, Brahim Hagiag, the guy who plays one of the resistance figures, Ali Lapointe,
Right.
he was literally just an illiterate farmer that Pontecorvo discovered at a market.
Wow. Just found him at a market.
Yeah. And the crazy part is, the only professional actor in the entire film was Jean Martin.
Yeah.
And he plays the French paratrooper commander, Colonel Mathieu.
Which is just structural brilliance when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
The critics in the Criterion essays actually point out how that casting decision inherently isolates the colonial power.
Oh, for sure.
Because the colonial military is represented by this trained professional performing a highly calculated role.
Mm-hmm.
But the resistance is represented by the raw, totally untrained faces of the actual population.
It creates this fascinating dissonance for the viewer. And it forces you out of the role of just being a passive consumer.
Right, because you don't have those Hollywood safety nets.
Exactly. Without professional actors giving those highly polished, emotionally manipulative performances, you have to become an active observer.
It's kind of the difference between a Hollywood lens and a security camera.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Yeah, because a traditional director uses the lens to tell you where to look, when to cry, who to love. They give the main character a sympathetic backstory so you forgive them when they do bad things.
Right, but Pontecorvo's camera acts like a CCTV feed.
Exactly. It just coldly records the hallway.
Yeah.
If a bombing happens, it doesn't swell the music to make you feel a certain way. It just captures the debris. It forces you to be the jury.
That CCTV metaphor perfectly captures what Roger Ebert wrote about the film's moral landscape, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Ebert noted that because we aren't given those sympathetic backstories, we are forced to judge these individuals entirely on their political actions.
We can't say, well, he's doing a terrible thing, but he loves his dog.
Exactly. We only see the terrible thing and we only see the political justification for it.
But I want to push back on this idea of the cold recording for a second.
Okay, sure.
Because if you strip away empathy and just show raw, brutal action, does the source material suggest that morality ceases to exist entirely in a war zone?
Hmm.
Because if you just watch a CCTV feed of a riot, it can look like pure nihilism. Like, is the film arguing that human beings are just animals acting on instinct in a conflict?
Well, no, actually, the consensus across the BFI and Criterion essays is that the film vigorously rejects nihilism.
Okay, how so?
The events on screen always feel profoundly tragic, they never just feel like meaningless chaos. What the film observes is how the mechanics of a political struggle warp our baseline morality.
Warp it, right, not erase it.
Right. In a peacetime setting, an act of violence is universally condemned. But in the middle of an anti-colonial struggle, that exact same act of violence is suddenly weighed against a century of systemic oppression.
And weighed against the desperate fight for freedom and the immediate threat of military retaliation.
Exactly. So the morality hasn't vanished. It's just been placed into a pressure cooker.
Right, the everyday definitions become completely useless because the context has mutated into something an outsider wouldn't even recognize.
And the rules of engagement are being rewritten on the fly by the people living inside that pressure cooker. The critics point out that the real tragedy of the Battle of Algiers is watching both sides logically justify the suspension of their own moral codes.
Because both sides are operating in this vacuum where everyday morality no longer applies.
Yeah.
So they inevitably start to adopt each other's mechanics.
Oh, absolutely. The academic essays focus heavily on the structure of the film's editing to prove that exact point. The BFI retrospectives highlight just how procedural the narrative is.
It is relentlessly procedural. I mean, you watch the FLN, the Algerian Resistance Network, meticulously planning their strategies.
Right. You see the decentralized self-structure, the flow of communication, gathering resources.
And then, bam, the film immediately cuts to the French paratroopers meticulously planning their counter-strategies, detailing their military hierarchy, their intelligence gathering, their grid system for locking down the city.
It creates this really uncomfortable mirror effect. Opposing forces inevitably begin to reflect each other's brutal calculus.
It's like standing exactly between two mirrors reflecting each other infinitely.
Yeah.
Where does the original image even start?
Yeah. Yeah. And Ebert was particularly fascinated by the symmetry. He pointed out that Pontecorvo directs the military commander, Colonel Mathieu, not as some cartoonish, mustache-twirling villain.
As a hyper-rational tactician.
Exactly. Mathieu understands exactly what the resistance is doing, he respects their commitment, and he uses cold mathematical logic to dismantle them.
And the resistance uses that exact same cold mathematical logic to strike back at the colonial infrastructure.
Right. But wait, I have to jump in and play devil's advocate on this symmetry idea.
Go for it.
Because the film is fundamentally documenting an anti-colonial struggle. And it is inherently political. Pontecorvo himself was deeply political. So doesn't the source material suggest that the film secretly favors the resistance? I mean, if you make a movie about an occupied people fighting for independence, the audience is going to bring their own moral weight to that scale anyway?
That's a really fair point. Does it tip its hand and say, hey, these are the good guys?
Well, that assumption is exactly why the film remains so controversial and so widely studied even today. The Criterion essays dedicate a lot of time to refuting that idea.
Oh, interesting. How do they refute it?
They look at how Pontecorvo films the violence committed by the resistance. If the film were purely propaganda, it would romanticize their attacks, right? It would only show them targeting military installations or corrupt officials.
It would sanitize the rebellion.
Exactly, but it refuses to sanitize anything. Pontecorvo shows the resistance bombing civilian spaces like cafes filled with teenagers, public milk bars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he films the aftermath with the exact same clinical, unblinking detachment that he uses to film the French military's torture tactics. He shows the shattered glass, the bodies, the panic.
He shows you the reflection in the mirror and demands that you deal with it. The justification for the violence is entirely dependent on the perspective of the person committing it.
Yes, the colonial power justifies its brutal crackdowns, its checkpoints and interrogations as the necessary cost of maintaining order and quote-unquote civilizing the territory.
And the resistance justifies its bombings and assassinations as the only available language to fight an overwhelming systemic occupation. Both sides fully believe they possess the moral high ground.
Right. It's showing us the how, not telling us the who. If you are watching this film, the perspective from which you view the conflict completely defines how you judge the actors within it.
Which means the film forces you to hold two opposing, just agonizing truths in your head simultaneously.
Which is not easy to do.
Not at all. You have to accept that the fight for liberation is historically necessary, but also that the methods used in that fight, along with the methods used to suppress it, are deeply horrifying.
And holding those two truths is the cognitive dissonance right at the heart of political realism. The Sight and Sound analysis actually notes that this is why military organizations around the world have screened this film.
Wait, really? Like who?
From the Pentagon to various insurgent groups, they don't watch it for moral guidance, obviously. They watch it as an instructional manual on the mechanics of urban warfare.
That is wild.
Yeah, the film is just so impartial in its reporting of tactics that both sides of literally any conflict can watch it and see themselves reflected.
But, when both sides of a conflict use the same brutal calculus, and both sides can passionately and logically justify their actions from their own perspective,
Yeah.
the violence has nowhere to go but outward.
Right, it spills directly into the civilian population.
And that human toll is the inescapable gravity of the film. The academic angles eventually have to move away from political theory and ground themselves in the human tragedy.
Because Pontecorvo never lets the audience forget the collateral damage of the political struggle.
It's not some sterile game of chess where a piece is captured and just quietly removed from the board.
No, not at all.
It's a sledgehammer taken to the foundation of a house while everyone is still living inside. The sources focus on how the camera constantly lingers on the faces of the people caught in the middle.
When the military sweeps through the Kasbah, or when the resistance targets a European sector, the film focuses on the bystanders, the people who are just trying to exist.
Ebert's review leans really heavily into this lack of release, because in typical cinema, violence is presented as a tool for resolution, right?
Yeah, the tension builds, the protagonist uses violence to defeat the bad guy, the music swells, the problem is solved, and everyone goes home feeling catharsis.
We are so conditioned to expect that release valve. We want the violence to mean something final.
But the Battle of Algiers denies the viewer that catharsis entirely. It demonstrates that violence, especially in the context of an entrenched political struggle, is not a surgical tool that removes a problem.
It is a contagion.
Exactly. It creates endless cycles of retaliation. A bombing justifies a military sweep,
Which radicalizes more citizens.
which leads to another bombing, which leads to harsher military crackdowns.
The original political goals, whether it's independence or maintaining the empire, they frequently get swallowed completely by the self-sustaining mechanics of the violence itself. The machine just keeps feeding on the population.
Ennio Morricone's incredible score for the film really reinforces this cycle, too.
Oh, the music is brilliant.
It really is. The essays point out how Morricone uses this driving, repetitive, almost mechanical percussive theme for the military operations.
Like an engine?
Yeah, like an engine. And then he uses this mournful choral theme for the Algerian people. But as the violence escalates, the music doesn't provide a triumphant resolution for either side.
It just underscores the escalating tragedy of the machine at work. And the machine doesn't care about the ideology of the bodies it crushes.
It's such a heavy observational stance. It refuses to flinch, and it absolutely refuses to offer a comforting lie about the nature of war.
And the critics argue that demanding a comforting lie from historical conflicts is honestly a fool's errand. We crave the simplicity of, this side is pure and that side is evil. We want the clean narrative.
But accepting the reality presented in the Battle of Algiers means accepting that historical struggles are fought by flawed humans in impossible situations.
It means acknowledging that easy moral judgments are usually a luxury afforded by distance and time. When we look back at a conflict from 50 years in the future, we can easily assign the white hats and the black hats.
Right, because we know who won, we know how the history books were written, and we use that knowledge to essentially sanitize the past.
But the film strips away that luxury of distance. It puts a viewer on the ground in the fog of the immediate present, where the white hats and the black hats are covered in the exact same dust.
It challenges you to sit with the extreme discomfort of ambiguity.
We started this deep dive with that premise from the source notes. In conflicts, the line between right and wrong does not disappear, it merely becomes harder to see.
Yep.
We've looked at how a filmmaker used non-professional actors, newsreel aesthetics, and this intense procedural detachment to force audiences to confront the terrifying symmetry of power and resistance.
And the criticism surrounding this film has endured for decades precisely because the mechanics of conflict haven't really changed.
The technology evolves, sure.
Yeah, the technology evolves, but the human justifications, the cycles of violence, and the ultimate cost to the civilian population, they remain completely identical.
Which leaves us in a deep